Oh, oh, how are you doing today? How's it going? Hey, Wadsworth, good to see you. I am at the stage, and I'm going to be talking about the weather, so fair warning. But I'm at the stage in the weather where I'm just in denial. It was in the 40s today, and I had the windows open, and it was cold. Here I am, back with my windows all closed and in a big sweater. Because it's not that time of year yet. Moog, get it together. One day. One day it'll be nice and warm, and then I'll be complaining about that. So, you know, which would you rather hear me complain about? The cold or the heat? That's really all this is. Reading updates. Oh, I didn't bring the book over with me. I couldn't wait until Friday to finish tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, just because like so close. It was just over 100 pages, so it didn't take me, too long to read it, and I had time yesterday, so I finished reading it yesterday, which means on Friday I'm going to be starting a different book during reading sprints. But uh yeah, it was all right. I read it because it was the number one reader choice for fiction for 2023 or 2022. And yeah, I liked it. I don't know if it was the best fiction book that came out in 2022. I'm not one to judge that just because like I haven't read a lot of like newer books, but it was fine. I enjoyed it. Nothing particularly made me mad. There were bits that I think that I will remember like months into the future. So yeah, that's a good sign. I feel like the characters are, flawed in really good ways. And every choice and every conversation that they were having made sense with who they were as a character. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, if you don't know, it is about these two people, mostly about these two people. It's really three people who decide to create a video game, and they are at their senior year of college. And so they get fame and fortune and all the things that come with being, you know, popular, having a popular video game. And so they are trying to maneuver that while also trying to maneuver life, which is chaotic always. So it is interesting and it's good. I liked it. But the way I said it totally did not sound like I liked it, but I did. Mm, yeah, and since I finished that yesterday, it was the first book I read in May, which is exciting. Happy May. But tonight we are going to be reading Don Quixote. Look how far we are, my friends. We're getting there. We're making moves. We're making progress. We are starting with chapter 48 tonight, if I am reading that correctly. I am. Okay. Roman numerals. Every time I just like have to take a pause and be like, okay, 10 before 50, 5, 3. Okay, got it. Okay, so what happened last time? Well, currently they are on their way to Don Quixote and Sancho Panza's town. And Don Quixote is in a cage, and the people carrying the cage or like walking beside the cage are all disguised so that Don Quixote doesn't recognize them, but they're all people that he knows, like the barber, the priest, the like. But they are all disguised, and Don Quixote is convinced that these devils, spirits, oh, Pupil, Pipilis. I did not say that right. But hello, welcome in. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. A follow immediately into a sub. Thank you so much for using your Prime. Welcome in. So glad you're here. So let's see. Don Quixote, yes. He thinks that he is being taken by devils away. They are leaving the inn, and on their journey, they run into, I forgot what his name is. Maybe they don't even say his name. But there are other travelers, and they are like going side by side. They're going the same direction. They just happen to be faster than Don Quixote's crew. And they run into each other, and uh he's just like asking like what's going on, blah blah blah. Oh, so good, so good. I'm reading it in English though, not in Spanish. Yes, this book is difficult in Spanish. There are times where it's difficult in English as well, but yes, welcome in. Um I don't remember what it is. Oh, yes. Traveling, and so like they're talking about chivalry, all those things, and the traveler talks about like all the terrible things about chivalry books and the nonsense that's in them, and the priest is like, "Yeah, I totally get it. That's why we burned a bunch of his books." And then the traveler is like, excuse me, but there's also like a lot of good things in these books too, and then talks about that as well. And I think that is where we left off. I think that's where we left off. Yes. Okay, the canon. That's what he's called. I don't think he has a name yet, but the canon. And yeah, that's exactly where we left off because it picks up right where he's talking some more. So cool. Hey, Duddy, good to see you. All right, so let's go ahead and hop right in. So, chapter 48, in which the canon continues to discuss books of chivalry as well as other matters worthy of his ingenuity. "It is just as your grace says, Señor Canon," said the priest, "and for this reason the books of this kind that have been written so far are most worthy of rebuke, their authors caring nothing for solid discourse or the art and rules that could have guided them and made them as famous in prose as the two princes of Greek and Latin poetry are in verse." Hey Noodles, good to see you. "I, at least," replied the canon, "have felt a certain temptation to write a book of chivalry in which I followed all the points I have mentioned, and, to tell the truth, I have already written more than 100 pages. In order to learn if they correspond to my estimation of them, I have given them to intelligent, learned men who are very fond of this kind of reading, and to other men who are ignorant and care only for the pleasure of hearing nonsense, and from all of them I have received a most agreeable approval. And so I have not pursued the matter further, for it not only seemed unsuitable to my profession, but I also saw that the number of simple-minded men is greater than that of the prudent, and though it is better to be praised by a few wise men and mocked by many fools, I do not wish to subject myself to the confused judgment of the presumptuous mob, who tend to be the ones who read these books. But what most influenced me to put the task of finishing it out of my mind was an argument I had with myself, based on the plays that are produced now, and the argument said, if all, or almost all, the plays that are now popular, imaginative works as well as historical ones, are known to be nonsense and without rhyme or reason, and despite this, the mob hears them with pleasure and thinks of them and approves of them as good, when they are very far from being so. And the authors who compose them and the actors who perform them say they must be like this, because that is just how the mob wants them, and no other way. The plays that have a design and follow the story as art demands appeal to a handful of discerning persons who understand them, while everyone else is incapable of comprehending their artistry, and since, as far as the authors and actors are concerned, it is better to earn a living with the crowd than a reputation with the elite, this is what would happen to my book after I had signed singed my eyebrows trying to keep the precepts I have mentioned, and had become the tailor who wasn't paid. And there is a note here after tailor who wasn't paid, and it says, the tailor who wasn't paid is the first part of a proverb. The second part usually is not decided. That roughly translates as, the tailor wasn't paid and had to supply his own braid, meaning that one can lose twice, but not being paid a fee for a service, and by not being reimbursed for the expenses incurred in performing the service. Oh, it is very cozy. Yes, he totally does make an honest point there. Yes, absolutely. And although I have attempted at times to persuade the actors that they are mistaken in thinking as they do, and that they would attract a larger audience and gain more renown with artful plays than with nonsensical ones, they are so bound and committed to their opinion that there is no argument or evidence to make them change their minds. I remember that one day I said to one of these stubborn men, tell me, do you remember a few years ago when 3 tragedies were produced in Spain that were composed by a famous poet from these kingdoms? And they delighted and amazed and enthralled all who heard them, the simple as well as the wise, the mob as well as the elite, and those 3 plays alone earned more money than 30 of the best plays that have been put on since then. And there is a note after, famous poet from these kingdoms, and it says, the reference is to Lupercio Leonardo de Argensola, who tended to write in the classical style of the early Renaissance, clearly favored by Cervantes, in contrast to the more effusive complexities of the Baroque that were popular in the theater at the time. Oh, enjoy your lurk. Wadsworth, thank you so much for contributing to Sunday's stream. No doubt, said the author I am telling you about, your Grace is referencing Isabella, Phyllis, and Alejandra. Precisely, I replied, and considered whether they followed the precepts of the art, and if following them prevented them from being what they were and pleasing everyone, which means the fault lies not with the mob who demands nonsense, but with those who do not know how to produce anything else. For there was no foolishness in ingratitude avenged, numancia, and had none. None was found in the merchant lover, or in the kindly enemy, or in some other composed by certain talented poets who gained fame and renown for themselves and profit for those who produced them. All right, and each of those titles has a note after it, so I'm just going to go boom, boom, boom after each one. Okay, so La Ingratitud Vengada by Lope de Vega, Numancia by Miguel de Cervantes, El Mercader Amante by Gaspar de Aguilar, La Enemiga Favorable by Francisco Agustin Tarrega. If it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. Been saying it for years. I said some other things that I think left him confused, but not persuaded or convinced enough to change his erroneous opinion. Your Grace has touched on a subject, Senor Canon, said the priest, that has awakened my long-standing rancor towards the plays that are popular now, one that is equal to my dislike of novels of chivalry, for drama, according to Marcus Tullius Cicero, should be a mirror of human life, an example of customs, and an image of truth. But those that are produced these days are mirrors of nonsense, examples of foolishness, and images of lewdness. For what greater nonsense can there be than for a child to appear in the first scene of the first act in his swaddling clothes, and in the second scene to be a full-grown man with a beard, or to present to us a valiant old man and a cowardly youth, an eloquent lackey, a wise page, a king who is a laborer, and a princess who is a scullery maid? And what shall I say about their observance of the time in which the actions they represent take place? I have seen plays in which the first act began in Europe, the second in Asia, and the third concluded in Africa, and if there had been 4 acts, the fourth would have ended in America, making it a play that took place in all 4 corners of the globe. And if mimesis is the principal quality a play should have, how can it possibly satisfy anyone or even average intelligence if the action is supposed to occur in the days of King Pepin and Charlemagne, but the central character is the Emperor Heraclius? I'm totally saying that wrong, and that's okay. Who entered Jerusalem, bearing the cross, and conquered the Holy Sepulchre, like Godfrey of Bouillon, when there is an infinite number of years between one and the other. If the play is based on fictions, historical truths are introduced and parts of others are combined, though they occurred to different people and at different times, and this is done not with any effort at verisimilitude, but with glaring errors that are completely unforgivable. The worst thing is the ignorant folk who say that this is perfect, and that wanting anything else is pretentious and whimsical. Well then, what shall we say about sacred plays? What a number of false miracles and apocryphal, poorly understood stories they invent, attributing the miracles of one saint to another. And even in their secular plays they dare perform miracles, with no other concern or consideration than thinking that some miracle, or stage effect, as they call it, would be a good idea at that point, so the ignorant will marvel and come to the theater. All of this is prejudicial to the truth, and damaging to history, and even a discredit to the intelligence of Spaniards, because foreigners, who are punctilious in obeying the rules of drama, think of us as ignorant barbarians, seeing the absurdities and idiocies in the plays we produce. There is a note after plays we produce, and it says, "At the time Cervantes wrote this, the classical rules of drama were not followed anywhere in Europe, at least not in Italy, France, or England." Martin de Ricoeur wonders if Cervantes might actually have been thinking of prescribing treatises that were widely published, but adhered to by no playwright of significance. It would not be a sufficient excuse to say that the principal intention of well-ordered states in allowing the public performance of plays is to entertain the common folk with some honest recreation and distract them from the harmful humors born in idleness. And since this can be achieved with any play, good or bad, there's no reason to impose laws or to oblige those who write and act in them to make plays as they ought to, because, as I have said, any of them can accomplish what they are intended to accomplish. To which I would respond that this purpose would be achieved with unquestionably greater success by good plays rather than bad, for having heard an artful and well-constructed play, the audience would come out amused by the comic portions, instructed by the serious, marveling at the action, enlightened by the arguments, forewarned by the falsehoods, made wiser by the examples, angered at vice, enamored of virtue. A good play can awaken all these responses in the spirit of its audience, no matter how slow or unsophisticated it may be, and it is absolutely impossible for a play with all these qualities not to please, entertain, satisfy, and delight much more than one that lacks them, as do those ordinary performed these days. The poets who compose them are not responsible for this, because there are some who know very well the errors they are committing, and know extremely well what they ought to do. But since plays have become salable merchandise, they say, and in this they speak the truth, the companies will not buy them if they are not a certain type, and so the poet attempts to accommodate the requests of the companies that pay him for his work. The truth of this can be seen in the infinite number of plays composed by one of the most felicitous minds in these kingdoms, which display so much grace and so much charm, such elegant verses and such fine language, such grave thoughts and so elegant and lofty a style, that this fame is known throughout the world. Because these works attempt to accommodate the taste of the theater companies, not all of them have reached, though some have, the necessary degree of perfection. And there is a note after fame known throughout the world, and it says, the description is of Lope de Vega, who wrote hundreds of comedias. The exact number is not known, but a legendary 2,000 plays have been attributed to him, not to mention numerous works in other genres. He and Cervantes, his senior by some 15 years, had a highly competitive relationship. Lope apparently took great offense at this passage. Little drama going on. Real life drama because of a fiction book. Love it. Other poets composed their works so carelessly that after they had been performed, the actors had to flee and go into hiding, fearful that they will be punished, as they often have been, for putting on pieces prejudicial to certain kings and offensive to certain families. All these difficulties, and many others I will not mention, would cease if there were at court an intelligent and judicious person who would examine each play before it was performed, not only those produced in the capital, but also those put on anywhere in Spain, and without his approval, stamp, and signature, no magistrate anywhere would permit a play to be performed. In this fashion, the players would be careful to send their plays to court, and then they could perform them in safety, and those who write them would consider what they were doing with more thought and care, knowing that their works would have to undergo a rigorous examination by one who understands the art. In this way, good plays would be written and their purpose achieved. The entertainment of the common people, the good opinion of creative minds in Spain, the legitimate interests and safety of the actors, and the avoidance of the need to punish them. And if another official, or this same person, were charged with examining the new books of chivalry that are written, no doubt, some with the perfections your grace has mentioned would be published, thereby enriching our language with the pleasing and precious treasure of eloquence, and allowing some of the old books to be obscured by the light of the new ones that would provide virtuous entertainment, not only to the idle, but to those who are more occupied, for the bow cannot always be pulled taut, and it is not in the nature of human frailty to endure without honest recreation. The canon and the priest had reached this point in the conversation when the barber rode up to them and said to the priest, "This, Señor, is the place I mentioned, where we can rest and the oxen can find abundant fresh grass." "I agree," responded the priest. He told his companion what they planned to do, and the canon decided to remain with them, for he was drawn by the sight of the beautiful valley that lay before them. In order to enjoy the valley and the conversation of the priest, for whom he had developed a liking, and to learn in more detail the deeds of Don Quixote, the canon ordered some of his servants to go to the inn that was not far away, and bring back whatever they could find to eat, enough for everyone, because he had resolved to rest there that afternoon, to which one of his servants responded that the pack-mule, which probably had reached the inn already, carried enough provisions so that they would not need for anything from the inn except barley for the animals. "If that is true," said the canon, "take all the animals there and bring back the pack-mule." In the meantime, Sancho saw that he could speak to his master without the continual presence of the priest and barber, whom he regarded with suspicion, and he rode up to the cage that carried his master, and said to him, "Señor, I want to relieve my conscience and tell you what is going on in this matter of your enchantment. The fact is that these two riding here with their faces covered are the priest and the barber from our village, and I believe they've come up with this way of transporting you out of sheer envy, because your deeds are more famous than theirs. If what I say is true, it means that you're not enchanted, but deceived and misled. To prove it, I want to ask you one thing, and if you answer in a way I think you'll answer, you'll put your finger right on the deception and see that you haven't been enchanted, but had your wits turned around." "Ask what you wish, Sancho, my son," responded Don Quixote, "for I shall answer and respond as much as you desire. As for your saying that those men riding here with us are the priest and barber, it well may be that they seem to be our compatriots and friends, but you must not believe for a moment that they really and truly are. What you ought to believe and understand is that if they resemble them, as you say, it must be because those who have enchanted me have taken on their appearance and likeness, because it is easy for enchanters to assume whatever resemblance they choose. They must have assumed that our friendship in order to give you a reason to think that you think, and enter into a labyrinth of imaginings from which not even the cord of Theseus will help you to escape. And they must have done this so that I would waver in my understanding, and not be able to determine the origin of this calamity. If, on one hand, you tell me that I am accompanied by the barber and priest of our village, and if, on the other, I find myself in a cage, and I know that nothing human, but only a supernatural power could be sufficient to put me in a cage, what can I say or think except that the manner of my enchantment exceeds anything I have read in all the histories that deal with knights-errant who have been enchanted? Therefore, you can rest easy and be assured regarding their being who you say they are, because if they really are, then I am a Turk. As for wanting to ask me something, speak, and I shall respond, even if you ask me questions from now until tomorrow." "By the blessed Virgin," responded Sancho with a great shout, "is it possible that your grace is so thick-headed and so short on brains that you cannot see that what I'm telling you is the absolute truth, and that malice has more to do with your imprisonment and misfortune than enchantment? Even so, I'll prove to you you're not enchanted. Just tell me, when God frees you from this torment, and you find yourself in the arms of Señora Dulcinea, when you least expect it—" "Enough conjuring," said Don Quixote, "and just ask what you wish. I have already told you I shall answer everything completely." "That's all I ask," replied Sancho, "and what I want to know is for you to tell me, without adding or taking anything away, but truthfully, which is what we expect of all those who profess arms, as your grace professes them, and who call themselves knights-errant." "I say that I shall not lie in anything," responded Don Quixote. "Ask your question, for the truth is, Sancho, I am growing weary of all your vows and supplications and preambles." "I say that I am sure of my master's goodness and truthfulness, and so I'll ask something that goes right to the heart of the matter, speaking with respect, since your grace has been locked in the cage, enchanted, in your opinion. Have you had the desire and will to pass what they call major and minor waters?" "I do not understand what you mean by passing waters, Sancho. Speak more clearly if you want me to respond in a straightforward way." "Is it possible that your grace doesn't understand what it means to pass minor or major waters? Even schoolboys know that. Well, what I mean is, have you had the desire to do the thing nobody else can do for you?" "Ah, now I understand you, Sancho. Yes, I have, quite often, and even do now. Save me from this danger, for not everything is absolutely pristine." End of the chapter. All right. Oof. So, the canon and the priest are chatting about merits, I guess, of poetry and chivalry books. And then Sancho is like, "All right, Don Quixote, listen to me, your friend. You are not enchanted. These people here, you know them. They are taking you away in a cage." And Don Quixote is like, "Silly Sancho. I'm enchanted. They look like our friends because obviously that's what the enchanter wanted them to look like." Sancho's trying so hard. And Don Quixote just like has a response for everything. All right, chapter 49, which recounts the clever conversation that Sancho Panza had with his master, Don Quixote. Ah, said Sancho, I've got you there. That's what I wanted to know with all my heart and soul. Come, senor, can you deny what people usually say when a person's not feeling well? I don't know what's wrong with so-and-so. He doesn't eat or drink or sleep or answer sensibly when you talk to him. He must be enchanted. From what you can conclude that people who don't eat or drink or sleep or do the natural things I've mentioned are enchanted, but not people who want to do what your grace wants to do, and who drink when someone hands them water, and eat when there's food to be had, and answer every question that's asked of them. Don Quixote is well versed in delusion, I'll give him that. What you say is true, Sancho, responded Don Quixote. But I have already told you that there are many forms of enchantment, and it well may be that in the course of time one sort has replaced another, and perhaps in the kinds they use nowadays those who have been enchanted do everything I do, although they did not do so before. In short, one must not argue with or draw conclusions from the custom of the day. I know and believe that I am enchanted, and that suffices to make my conscience easy, for it would weigh heavily on me if I thought I was not enchanted, and in sloth and cowardice had allowed myself to be imprisoned in this cage, depriving the helpless and weak of the assistance I could provide. For at this very moment there must be many in urgent need of my succor and protection. Even so, replied Sancho, for your greater ease and satisfaction, it would be a good idea for your grace to try to get out of this prison. And I promise I'll do everything I can to help your grace and back to help get your grace out and back on your good Rocinante, who also seems enchanted. He's so melancholy and sad. And when we've done that, we'll try our luck again and search for more adventures. And if things don't go well for us, we'll still have time to get back to the cage, where I promise, like a good and loyal squire, to lock myself up along with your grace in case your grace is so unfortunate, or I'm so simple, that we can't manage to do what I've said. I'm happy to do as you say, Sancho, my brother, replied Don Quixote, and when you have the opportunity to effect my liberty, I shall obey you completely in everything. But you will see, Sancho, how mistaken you are in your understanding of my misfortune. This conversation engaged the knight-errant and his erring squire until they reached the spot where the priest, the canon, and the barber, who had already dismounted, were waiting for them. The driver unyoked the oxen from the cart and allowed them to roam free in that green and peaceful place whose freshness was so inviting, if not to persons as enchanted as Don Quixote, then to those as capable and clever as his squire, who pleaded with the priest to allow his master out of the cage for a while, because if they did not let him out, his person would not be as clean as decency demanded for a knight like his master. The priest understood him, and said he would gladly do as he asked, if he were not afraid that as soon as his master found himself free, he would do one of those mad things so typical of him, and go away, and never be seen by anyone again. I'll guarantee that won't happen. Nope, that's not what he guarantees. I'll guarantee that he won't run away, responded Sancho. And I'll guarantee that, and more, said the canon, if he gives me his word as a gentleman and a knight that he will not go away from us until we agree he can. Atkinson, good to see you, good to see you. It's been a while, my friend. Oh, excellent. Have a good dinner. Enjoy cooking. I do give it, he responded, Don Quixote, who was listening to everything, especially since one who is enchanted, as I am, is not free to do with his person what he might wish, because whoever enchanted him can make him stand stock still and not move from a spot for 3 centuries, and if he were to flee, he would be flown back through the air. Since this was true, they could certainly release him, especially because it would be to everyone's benefit, and he protested that if they did not release him, the smell would surely trouble them unless they moved a good distance away. The canon took one of Don Quixote's hands, although both were tied together, and on the basis of the knight's promise and word, they let him out of the cage, and he was infinitely and immensely happy to find himself free, and the first thing he did was to stretch his entire body, and then he went up to Rocinante, slapped him twice on the haunches, and said, "I still hope to God, and his blessed mother, O flower and paragon of horses, that we soon shall see ourselves as we wish to be, you with your master on your back, and I mounted on you and exercising the profession for which God put me in this world." And having said this, Don Quixote moved away with Sancho to a remote spot and returned much relieved and even more desirous of putting his squire's plan into effect. The canon looked at him, marveling at the strangeness of his profound madness, and at how he displayed a very fine intelligence when he spoke and responded to questions, his feet slipping from the stirrups, as has been said many times before, only when the subject was chivalry. And so, after everyone had sat on the green grass to wait for the provisions, the canon, moved by compassion, said to him, "Is it possible, Señor, that the grievous and idle reading of books of chivalry could have so affected your grace that it has unbalanced your judgment and made you believe that you are enchanted, along with other things of this nature, which are as far from being true as truth is from lies? How is it possible that any human mind could be persuaded that there has existed in the world that infinity of Amadises, and that throng of so many famous knights, so many emperors of Trebizond, so many Felix Martes of Hyrcania, so many palfreys and wandering damsels, so many serpents and dragons and giants, so many unparalleled adventures and different kinds of enchantments, so many battles and fierce encounters, so much splendid attire, so many enamored princesses and squires who are counts and dwarfs, who are charming, so many love letters, so much wooing, so many valiant women, and finally, so many nonsensical matters as are contained in books of chivalry. For myself, I can say that when I read them, as long as I do not set my mind to thinking that they are all frivolous lies, I do derive some pleasure from them. But when I realize what they actually are, I throw even the best of them against the wall, and would even toss them in a fire if it were near, and think they richly deserved the punishment for being deceptive and false and far beyond the limits of common sense, like the founders of new sects and new ways of life, and for giving the ignorant rabble a reason to believe and consider as true all the absurdities they contain. They are so audacious, they dare perturb the minds of judicious and well-born gentlemen, as can be plainly seen in what they have done to your grace, for they have brought you to the point where it has been necessary to lock you in a cage and carry you on an ox cart, as if you were a lion or tiger being transported from town to town so that people could pay to see you. Come, come, Señor Don Quixote, take pity on yourself. Return to the bosom of good sense, and learn to use the considerable intelligence that heaven was pleased to give you, and devote your intellectual talents to another kind of reading that redounds to the benefit of your conscience and the increase of your honor. And if, following your natural inclinations, you still wish to read books about great chivalric deeds, read Judges and Holy Scriptures, and there you will find magnificent truths and deeds both remarkable and real. Lusitania had a Viriato. Rome had a Caesar. Carthage a Hannibal. Greece an Alexander. Castilia a Count Fernan Gonzalez. Valencia a Cid. Andalusia a Gonzalo Fernandez. Extremadura a Diego Garcia de Paredes. Juarez a Garcia Perez de Vargas. Toledo a Garcilaso. Sevilla a Don Manuel de Leon. Okay, and after each one of those notes, or each one of those names is a note. So I'm just gonna go through each one of those. Okay. Viriato led a Lusitanian, Portuguese, rebellion against the Romans. Count Fernan Gonzalez declared the independence of Castilla from the Moors in the 10th century. Gonzalo Fernandez was the great captain so called for his military exploits during the reign of the Catholic sovereigns Ferdinand and Isabella. Diego Garcia was a military hero who fought with Gonzalo Fernandez. Perez de Vargas, a historical figure mentioned in chapter 8, broke his sword in battle, then tore a branch from an oak tree and used it to kill countless Moors. Garcilaso de la Vega, not to be confused with the Renaissance poet of the same name, fought in the war to capture Granada from the Moors. Don Manuel de Leon entered a lion's cage to recover a glove that a lady had thrown inside in order to test his courage. When he returned the glove, she slapped him for endangering the life of a knight on a whim. Star, so good to see you. Thank you for contributing to Sunday's stream. Green Sonnen, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. There we go. Reading about their valorous deeds can entertain, instruct, delight, and astonish the highest minds. This would certainly be a study worthy of your grace's intelligence, Señor Don Quixote, and from it you would emerge learned in history, enamored of virtue, instructed in goodness, improved in your customs, valiant but not rash, bold and not cowardly, and all of this would honor God and benefit you, and add to the fame of La Mancha where, I have learned, your grace has an origin and birthplace. Oh, excellent. That that has to be a first for me as well. I am terrible with names, but I'm so glad that I got your name right. It was meant to be. Don Quixote listened very attentively to the canon's words, and when he saw that he had concluded, he looked at him for a long time. Oh, it's a Swedish. Thank you. It seemed to me, Signor, that the intention of your grace's discourse has been to persuade me that there have been no knights-errant in the world, and that all the books of chivalry are false, untrue, harmful, and of no value to the nation. And that I have done wrong to read them, and worse to believe them, and worse yet to imitate them, by setting myself the task of following the extremely difficult profession of knight-errantry which they teach, and you deny that there ever were Amadises in the world, whether of Gaul, or of Greece, or any of the other knights that fill the writings. That is precisely what I meant. What you have said is absolutely correct, said the canon, to which Don Quixote responded. Your grace also said that these books have done me a good deal of harm, for they turned my wits and put me in a cage, and it would be better for me to alter and change my reading and devote myself to books that are truer and more pleasant and more instructive. That is true, said the canon. Well then, replied Don Quixote, it is my opinion that the one who is deranged and enchanted is your grace, For you have uttered so many blasphemies against something so widely accepted in the world as true, that whoever denies it, as your grace has done, deserves the same punishment that your grace says you give to books when you read them and they anger you. Because wanting to convince anyone that there was no Amadis in the world, or any of the other adventuring knights who fill the histories, is the same as trying to persuade that person that the sun does not shine, ice is not cold, and the earth bears no crops. For what mind in the world can persuade another that the story of Princess Floripes and Guy de Bourgogne is not true, or the tale of Fierabras and the bridge of Mantible, which occurred at the same time of Charlemagne and is as true as the fact that it is now day. And there's a note right after that, and it says the two anecdotes appear in a history of Charlemagne and the 12 Peers, published in Alcala in 1589. If that is a lie, it must also be true that there was no Hector, no Achilles, no Trojan War, no 12 Peers of France, no King Arthur of England, who was transformed into a crow and whose return is awaited in his kingdom to this day. Who will go so far as to say that the history of Gorino Meschino is false, and the search for the Holy Grail and the loves of Don Tristan and Queen Iseult and those of Guinevere and Lancelot are apocryphal, even though there are persons who can almost remember having seen the dueña Quitaniana. The word is split into two lines, apologies, or her name, rather, was the greatest pourer of wine in Great Britain. And there are two notes in that sentence. The first one is after Carina Meschino, and it says, the two anecdotes appear in... Oh, wait, no. Yeah, okay, here we go. Carina Meschino, a book entitled Crónica del Nombre Caballero Guillermo Meschino, was cited by Juan de Valdez, an important... Zadian, hello. Welcome in. Thank you so much. A book entitled Crónica del Nombre Caballero Guarina Mezquino was cited by Juan de Valdez, an important humanist of the early 16th century, as being very poorly written and even more absurd than other novels of chivalry. And then the other note is after Dueña, and it says, a figure associated with the Lancelot story who passed into popular ballads and became part of the folk tradition in Spain. And this is so true that I remember my paternal grandmother saying, whenever she saw a lady with a formal headdress, "My boy, she looks like the Dueña Quintanona." And from this I argue that she must have known her, or at least seen a portrait of her, and who can deny the truth of the history of Pierres and the beautiful Magalona? For even today one can see in the royal armory the peg, slightly larger than a carriage pole, with which the valiant Pierres directed the wooden horse as he rode it through the air. And there's a note after Magalona, and it says, the provincial story of Pierres de Provence and the beautiful Magalona was extremely popular in the 16th century. Its Spanish translation was published in 1519. And next to the peg in the saddle of Babieca and at Roncesvalles, there is Roland's horn, the size of a large rafter, from which one can infer that there were 12 peers, and a Pierres and a Cid, and the other knights like them, the ones that people say go searching for adventures. And there's a note after that, and it says, These lines were cited previously in chapter 9. All right then. If you deny that, you will also tell me that it is not true that the valiant Lusitanian Juan de Marlo was a knight-errant who went to Burgundy and fought at the city of Arras with the famous lord of Charny, called Monseigneur Pierres, and then in the city of Basel with Monseigneur Henri de Remestan, emerging from both undertakings victorious and covered with honor and fame. You will deny the adventures and challenges also carried out in Burgundy by the valiant Spaniards Pedro Barba and Gutierre Quijada, from whom I am descended directly through the male line, when they conquered the sons of the Count of San Paulo. And there are two notes. One is after Lusitanian Juan de Merlo, and it says, a Castilian knight of Portuguese descent who served under Juan II. And then the second note is after Gutierre Quijada, and it says, the deeds of these two knights, who were cousins, are narrated in chapter 25 of the Crónica de Juan II, the Chronicles of Juan II. Here we are. You will deny as well that Don Fernando de Guevara went to seek adventures in Germany, where he fought with Monsieur Jorge, a knight in the house of the Duke of Austria. You will say that the jousts of Suero de Quiñones of the pass were a deception, and you will deny the feats of Monsignor Luis de Falces against Don Gonzalo de Guzman, a Castilian knight, as well as many other deeds performed by Christian knights from their kingdoms and from foreign ones, deeds so authentic and true that I say again that whoever denies them must be lacking in all reason and good sense.
Hi Moog, it's 10:57 p.m. here. Time for a bedtime story.
Time for a bedtime story. Hello, Infinite. So good to see you. Thank you for the biddies. Just in time for a bedtime story. Okay. There were two notes in that sentence. So many footnotes. Okay, let's see. After Suero de Quiñones at the pass where deception, it says oh, where is it? Here we are. Oh no, hold on, we missed a note. Okay. After Don Fernando de Guevara, it says Don Fernando de Guevara was also cited in the Chronicle de Juan II, and then after Señor de Quiñones at the pass where deception, it says in 1434, with the permission of Juan II, Suero Quiñones, for the love of his lady, jousted with 68 challenging knights at what is called the Honorable Pass. And then there's another note after Castilian Knight. It says an encounter that was also cited in Crónica de Juan II. So many footnotes. Also, so many names, and I am terrible with saying names. So, good luck trying to actually figure out what name I'm saying. The canon was astonished when he heard Don Quixote's mixture of truth and falsehood, and saw how well informed he was regarding everything related to and touching on the exploits of knight-errantry, and so he responded. I cannot deny, Señor Don Quixote, that some of what your grace has said is true, especially with regards to Spanish knights-errant. By the same token, I also wish to concede that there were 12 peers of France, though I cannot believe they did all those things that Archbishop Herpin writes about them, because the truth of the matter is that they were knights chosen by the kings of France, and were called peers because they were all equal in worth, nobility, and valor, or at least, if they were not, they should have been. They were like a religious order, similar to the modern orders of Santiago or Calatrava, in which one supposes that those who profess are, or should be, worthy, valiant, and well-born knights, and just as today one calls a man a knight of San Juan or a knight of Alcantara, in those days one said a knight of the 12 peers, because they were 12 equal knights selected for this military order. That was all one sentence, which is insane. And there is a note after Archbishop Turpin, and it says Turpin is the fictitious author of a chronicle about Charlemagne. As for El Cid, there can be no doubt that he existed, and certainly none about Bernardo del Carpio. But I think it exceedingly doubtful that they performed the deeds people say they did, with regard to the peg of Count Pierre's, which you mentioned as being next to the saddle of Babieca in the royal armory. I confess my sin. I am so ignorant, or so short-sighted, that although I have seen the saddle, I have never laid eyes on the peg, especially if it is big as your grace says it is. Well, it is there, no doubt about it, replied Don Quixote, and they also say it is kept in a cowhide sheath to protect it from rust. That well may be, responded the canon, but by the orders I received I do not remember seeing it, and even if I concede that it is there, I am not therefore obliged to believe the histories of so many Amadises, or those of that throng of knights about whom they tell us stories, nor is it reasonable for an honorable man like your grace, possessed of your qualities and fine understanding, to accept as true the countless absurd exaggerations that are written in those nonsensical books of chivalry. End of the chapter. All right, so uh, Don Quixote is out of his cage, sitting on a grassy knoll, and him and the canon are talking back and forth about whether or not the actions in the chivalry books are real. And the canon sort of tries to call him out of his delusion and saying, like, okay, so if I'm getting this correct, you read a bunch of fiction books about people who aren't real, and you've taken it upon yourself to live the same life that they've led. And then Don Quixote's retort is, how can you say that they're not real? And then he mixes both real people and real battles also with fictitious ones. So he just sort of like merges what has actually happened and what hasn't. Oh, Star, you always catch me in a sip. All right. Chapter 50. We are on page 428. Chapter 50. Regarding the astute arguments that Don Quixote had with the canon, as well as other matters. That is really good, responded Don Quixote. Books that are printed with a royal license, and with the approval of those officials to whom they are submitted, and read to widespread delight, and celebrated by great and small, poor and rich, educated and ignorant, low-born and gentry, in short, by all kinds of persons of every rank and station, can they possibly be a lie? Especially when they bear so close a resemblance to the truth, and tell us about a father, the mother, the nation, the family, the age, the birthplace, and the great deeds, point by point, and day by day, of the knights, or knights in question. Be quiet, your grace, and do not say such blasphemies, and believe me when I tell you that what you, as an intelligent man, must do in this matter, which is to read these books, and then you will see the pleasure you derive from them. Ooh, interesting. Yeah, I totally wonder that too, what Don Quixote would think of the Three Musketeers. Hmm. I want that. I want that fanfic. If you do not agree, Then tell me this. Is there any greater joy than seeing, before your very eyes, you might say, a great lake of boiling pitch, and in it, swimming and writhing about, there are many snakes, serpents, lizards, and many other kinds of fierce and fearsome creatures, and from the middle of the lake there comes an extremely sad voice, saying, Thou, O knight, whosoever thou mayest be, who looketh upon this fearful lake, if thou wishest to grasp the treasure hidden beneath these ebon waters, display the valor of thy mighty heart, and throw thyself into the midst of its black and burning liquid. For if thou wilt not, thou canst not be worthy of gazing upon the wondrous marvels contained and enclosed within the 7 castles of the 7 enchantresses, which lieth beneath this blackness. And no sooner has the knight heard the fearsome voice, than without hesitating or stopping to consider the danger he faces, and without even stripping off the weight of his heavy armor, he commends himself to God and his lady, and throws himself into the middle of the boiling lake, and when he cannot see or imagine where he will land, he finds himself among flowering meadows, even more beautiful than the Elysian fields. There it seems to him that the sky is more translucent and the sun shines with a new clarity. Before him lies a peaceful grove of trees so green and leafy, their verdure brings joy to his eyes, while his ears are charmed by the sweet, untutored song of the infinite number of small, brightly colored birds that fly among the intricate branches. Here he discovers a brook whose cool waters, like liquid crystal, run over fine sand and white pebbles that seem like sifted gold and perfect pearls. There he sees a fountain artfully composed of vari-colored jasper and smooth marble. Over there he sees another fountain fashioned as a grotto, where tiny clamshells and the coiled white and yellow houses of the snail are arranged with conscious disorder, and mixed with bits of shining glass and counterfeit emeralds, forming so varied a pattern that art, imitating nature, here seems to surpass it. Suddenly, there appears before him a fortified castle or elegant fortress, whose walls are made of solid gold, its parapet of diamonds, its doors of sapphires. In short, it is so wonderfully built that although its materials are nothing less than diamonds, carbuncles, rubies, pearls, gold, and emeralds, its workmanship is even finer. Yes, they did. Everything must be translated into ye old English. And yeah, I totally get it. Wonder if Don Quixote would think of the adventures. Yes, I too want to know. And feels like it was inspired by Don Quixote in a lot of ways. Interesting, yeah. Mouse my spot. There we go, okay. And after this, is there any more marvelous sight than seeing a good number of damsels come out through the gate of the castle, wearing dresses so splendid and sumptuous that, if I began now to describe them as the histories do, I should never finish. And then, the maiden who seems the leader among them takes by the hand the bold knight who threw himself into the boiling lake, and, without saying a word, guides him inside the rich fortress or castle, and has him strip as naked as the day as he was born, and bathes him in warm water, and then smooths his entire body with sweet-smelling ointments, and dresses him in a shirt of finest silk, all fragrant and perfumed. And then another damsel comes and covers his shoulders with a cloak that, they say, is worth at least a city and even more. What better sight after all this than when we are told that he is taken to another chamber, where he finds tables laid so lavishly he is stunned and amazed. Observe him as he pours over his hands water that is distilled with ambergris and scented flowers, and see him sit on a chair of ivory, and watch him being served by all the damsels, who maintain a wondrous silence as they bring him so many different foods, so exquisitely prepared that appetite does not know where to place its hands. How marvelous is it to hear the music that plays as he eats, though he does not know who is singing or where. And when the meal is over and the tables cleared and the knight is reclining in his chair, perhaps cleaning his teeth with a toothpick, as is the custom, to have another damsel, much more beautiful than any of the others, come in through the chamber door and sit beside the knight, and begin to explain to him what castle this is, and that she resides there, and is enchanted, and many other things that amaze the knight and astound the reader who are reading the history. There is a note after cleaning his teeth with a toothpick, as is the custom, and it says, "This detail seems comically incongruous, yet picking one's teeth after a meal was so common during the Renaissance that it was employed by a kind of trope for the necessary deceptions of genteel poverty. For example, in Lazarillo de Tormes, when the hungry gentleman walks down the street wielding a toothpick to indicate that he has eaten." Interesting, interesting. Bow, chicka, wow, wow. Do not wish to go any further with this, for one can gather from what I have said that anyone can read any part of any history of a knight-errant, and from it derive great pleasure and delight. Oh, you've read that one too? You're so well read, Wadsworth. And your grace should believe me when I tell you, as I already have, to read these books, and you will see how they drive away melancholy if you are so afflicted, and improve your spirits if they happen to be low. For myself, I can say that since I became a knight-errant, I have been valiant, well-mannered, liberal, polite, generous, courteous, bold, gentle, patient, long-suffering in labors, imprisonments, and enchantments, and although only a short while ago I saw myself locked in a cage like a madman, I think that with the valor of my arm, and heaven favoring me, the fortune not opposing me, in a few days I shall find myself the king of some kingdom where I can display the gratitude and liberality of my heart. For by my faith, Signor, the poor person is incapable of displaying the virtue of liberality with anyone, even if he possesses it to the greatest degree, and gratitude that consists of nothing more than desire is a dead thing, as faith without works is dead. For this reason I should like fortune to offer me without delay an opportunity to become an emperor, so that I can display my heartfelt desire to do good with for my friends, especially this poor Sancho Panza, my squire, who is the best man in the world, and I should like to give him a courtship, which I promised him many days ago, even though I fear he may not have the ability to govern his estate." As soon as Sancho heard the last words of his master, he said, "Your Grace, Señor Don Quixote, should work to give me the courtship that has been promised by your Grace and hoped for me by me, and I promise you I'll have no lack of ability to govern it, and if I do, and I've heard it said that there are men in the world who farm the estates of gentlemen, who pay them so much each year to manage everything, and the gentleman sits with his feet up, enjoying the rent they pay, and not worrying about anything else, and that's what I'll do. I won't haggle over trifles, but I'll turn my back on everything, and enjoy my rent like a duke, and let the others do the work." "Brother Sancho," said the canon, "that's fine as far as enjoying the rent is concerned, but the administration of justice has to be tended to by the owner of the estate, and this is where ability and good judgment come in, and in particular a real intention to do what is right, for if this is lacking at the beginning, the middle and the end will always be wrong. In this way, God tends to favor the virtuous desires of the simple man, and confound the wicked intentions of the intelligent." You remember it as being a street urchin has adventures story. I want that to be a title. Street urchin has adventures. This just in. "I don't know about these philosophies," responded Sancho Panza. "All I know is that as soon as I have the countship, I'll know how to govern it. I have as much soul as any other man, and as much body as the biggest of them, and I'll be as much a king of my estate as any other is of his. And this being true, I'll do what I want, and doing what I want, I'll do what I like, and doing what I like, I'll be happy. And when a man is happy, he doesn't wish for anything else, and not wishing for anything else, that'll be the end of it. So bring on my estate, and God's will, and God willing we'll see, as one blind man said to the other. Those aren't bad philosophies, as you call them, Sancho. But even so, there's a good deal to say regarding this matter of countship. Whatever. I do what I want. To which Don Quixote replied, I do not know if there is more to say. I am guided only by the example of the great Amadis of Gaul, who made his squire Count of Insula Firme. Therefore I can, without scruple or question of conscience, make a Count of Sancho Panza, who is one of the best squires a knight-errant ever had. The canon was astounded by the reasoned nonsense spoken by Don Quixote, by the manner in which he had described the adventure of the Knight of the Lake, by the impression that had been made on him by the intentional lies of the book he had read, and, finally, by the simple-mindedness of Sancho, who so fervently desired to obtain the countship his master had promised him. By now the canon's servant had returned from the inn, where they had gone for the pack-mule, and making a table of a rug and the meadow's green grass, they sat in the shade of some trees and ate their meal there, so that the ox-driver could take advantage of the grazing of his animals, as we have already said. While they are eating, they suddenly heard a loud noise and the tinkling of a small bell from some nearby brambles and heavy underbrush, and at the same time they saw a beautiful black, white, and gray-spotted nanny goat emerge from the thicket. Behind her came a goatherd, calling to her, saying the words that goatherds say to make their animals stop or return to flock. The fugitive goat, frightened and apprehensive, came up to the company as if asking for their help, and there she stopped. The goatherd ran up, seized her by the horns, and as if she were capable of rational thought and speech, said to her, "Ah, Spot, my Spot, you're just so wild these days, dashing all around. What wolves are scaring you, my girl? Won't you tell me what's wrong, my pretty? What else can it be but that you are a female and can't be quiet, and the devil take your condition and all those females you're imitating? Come back, my friend, and if you're not happy, at least you'll be safer in the fold, or with your companions, and if you, who are supposed to lead and guide them, go astray without a guide, what will happen to them?" The goatherd's words amused those who were listening, especially the canon, who said to him, "By your life, brother, calm down a little, and do not hurry to return that goat so quickly to her flock. For since she is a female, as you say, she must follow her natural instinct, no matter how you may try to prevent it. Eat something, and have a drink to cool your anger, and in the meantime the nanny goat can rest." And saying this, and handing him a hind quarter of cold rabbit on the tip of a knife, were all one. The goatherd accepted it with thanks. He drank and grew calm, and then he said, "I would not want your graces to think I'm simple because I talked to this animal sensibly, as if she could understand, for the truth is the words I said are not mysterious. A rustic I may be, but not so rustic that I don't understand how to talk to men and to beasts." "I certainly believe that," said the priest, "for I already know from experience that mountains breed learned men, and shepherds' huts house philosophers." "At least, señor," replied the goatherd, "they shelter men who have suffered greatly, and so that you may believe this truth and touch it with your hand, even though I seem to be inviting myself without being asked, if it does not trouble you to do so, and if it is your wish, señores, lend me your ears for a while, and I shall tell you a truth that confirms what this gentleman," and he pointed the priest, and I have said. To which Don Quixote responded, because this matter seems to have some shadow of a knightly adventure, I, for my part, shall hear you very willingly, brother, and all of these gentlemen will do the same, for they are very intelligent, and are fond of curious and extraordinary things that amaze, delight, and entertain the senses, as I think your story undoubtedly will. Begin, then, my friend, and all of us shall listen. I pass, said Sancho. I'm going over to the brook with this meat pie, where I plan to eat enough for 3 days, because I've heard my master, Don Quixote, said that the squire of a knight-errant has to eat whenever he can, and as much as he can, because they might go into woods so deep they can't find their way out again for 6 days, and if the man isn't full or his saddlebags aren't well provisioned, he might stay there, as often happens, until his flesh wrinkles and dries like a mummy. You are correct, Sancho, said Don Quixote. Go where you wish and eat what you can. I am satisfied, and all I need is to nourish my spirit, which I shall do by listening to this good man's story. And so shall we all, said the canon. Then he asked the goatherd to begin the tale he had promised. The goatherd gave the goat, which he was holding by the horns, 2 slaps on the haunches, and said, Lie down next to me, Spot. There's time before we have to return to the fold. The nanny goat seemed to understand him, because when her master sat down, she lay down next to him very calmly and looked into his face, as if letting him know that she was listening to what he was saying. And the goatherd began his history in this fashion. End of chapter 50. All right, we have a new character who's going to reveal their whole life story, which seems to be the formula for this book. Meet a new character, immediately know their life story, sometimes meet other characters separately from this first character, and their story is tied together. Then they all meet together. End of their like little mini series. So we'll see. We'll see. Banned by the church. Interesting. Wadsworth, thank you so much for the recommendation. Infinite, thank you so much. Is that gravelly my vocal fry. You don't actually remember if it's good or not. While I'm dragging you into this with me, Wadsworth, you will find out. Well, it's super old, so it'll be a story time. But if it's banned by the church, it must be worth a read. It's totally like anytime they have those like explicit content labels on things, like on books or on like back when CDs were a thing that people would buy, like that's how you would know, like, ooh, this CD is gonna be great, my mom's gonna hate it, and it'll be amazing. So, yes, Duddy, I totally agree. Having a banned book section in like a bookstore is always go there. The author stayed anonymous to avoid crucifixion. That's wild. That's wild. All right, well, color me intrigued. Okay. Okay. Um, almost click end stream instead of coming back. I was like, oh, look, a big red button. That's the button I need to click, obviously. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're back. Oh my gosh. Adjusting really quick. Here we go, getting cozy. Alright, chapter 51, which recounts what the goatherd told to all those who were taking Don Quixote home. All right, so now we're getting the goat herd's story. We'll see. 3 leagues from this valley is a village that, although small, is one of the richest in the entire region. In it, there lived a farmer who was very well respected. So respected, in fact, that although honor tends to go with wealth, he was more honored for his virtue than for the riches he had achieved. But his greatest happiness, as he would say, was having a daughter of such extraordinary beauty and exceptional intelligence, grace, and virtue, that whoever knew her and saw her marveled to see the unsurpassed gifts that heaven and nature had granted her. As a child she was comely, and as she grew, so did her loveliness, and at the age of 16 she was exceedingly beautiful. The fame of her beauty began to spread to all the neighboring villages. Why do I say neighboring? It spread it to distant cities, and even entered the royal salons, and came to the attention of all kinds of people, and as if she were a rare object or a miraculous image, they came from far and near to see her. Her father watched over her, and she watched over herself, for there are no locks or bars or bolts that protect a maiden better than her own modesty and virtue. The father's wealth and the daughter's beauty moved many from the village as well as strangers to ask for her hand, but the farmer, in possession of so rich a jewel, was somewhat perplexed, and could not decide to which of the countless suitors he should give her. I was one of the many who had this virtuous desire, and I had many great hopes of success, knowing that her father knew who I was, since I came from the same village, and was pure of blood, and in the flower of my youth, and had a rich estate, and was not lacking in intelligence. Another man from our village, with the same qualifications, had also asked for her hand, causing her father to hesitate, unable to reach a decision, for it seemed to him that either one of us would be a good match for his daughter. In order to resolve the problem, he determined to discuss it with Leandra, which is the name of the wealthy maiden who keeps me in misery, for he believed that since we were equally qualified, it was a good idea to allow his beloved daughter to choose to her liking, a course of action worthy of imitation by all parents who wish their children to marry. I don't say they should be permitted to choose the base or wicked, but they should be offered the good, and then be allowed to choose freely. I don't know which of us Leandra chose. I know only that her father put off both of us with reference to his daughter's youth and other general remarks that did not commit him, but did not dismiss us either. My rival's name is Anselmo, and I am Eugenio. So now you know the names of all the persons who take part of this tragedy, which is not yet concluded, though it seems clear enough that its end will be calamitous. At about this time, a certain Vicente de la Rosa came to town. He was the son of a poor farmer from our village, and had been a soldier in Italy and in many other places. And there is a note after Vicente. Vicente, my bad. Not Vicente, Vicente. How silly of me. And it says, in the first edition, the character is called Rosa twice and Roca once. Subsequent editions, including many modern ones, call him Roca. In the first English, French, and Italian translations, which are cited by Martin de Ricoeur, Shelton calls him Vincente of the Rose. Oiden calls him Vincent de la Roque, and Franciosini calls him Vincencio de la Rosa. There you go. All these fun little facts. These fun little facts that you can bring up at parties. Amaze your friends. He had been taken away from our village when he was a boy of 12 by a captain passing through, and his troop, and with his troops, and the boy returned 12 years later, dressed as a soldier, decked out in 1,000 colors, and wearing 1,000 glass trinkets and thin metal chains. One day he would put on one piece of finery, and the next day another, but all of them were flimsy and garish, lightweight, and worthless. Farmers, who by nature are crafty, and who become the very embodiment of craftiness when idleness gives them the opportunity, noticed this, and counted each object and piece of finery, and discovered that he had 3 outfits, each a different color, with garters and hose to match. But he mixed and combined them so cleverly that if you did not keep count, you would have sworn he had displayed more than 10 matched outfits and more than 20 proud plumes. And do not think that what I am saying about his clothes is irrelevant or trivial, because they play an important part in this story. He would sit on a stone bench that is under a great poplar tree in our village square, and there he would keep us all open-mouthed with suspense as he recounted great deeds to us. There was no land anywhere in the world that he did not know, that he had not seen, and no battle in which he had not fought. He had killed as many Moors as live in Morocco and Tunis, and had engaged in more single combat than Gante and Luna, Diego Garcia de Paredes, and another 1,000 men he named, and from all of them he had emerged victorious, without shedding a single drop of blood. And there is a note after Gante and Luna, and it says, "The identities of these 2 men are not known. According to Martin, it is possible that the manuscript read Garcilaso, who was cited earlier in chapter 49 with Garcia de Paredes." On the other hand, he would show us the scars of wounds, and even though he could not make them out, he let us know that they had been caused by shots from flintlocks in various battles and skirmishes. Finally, the unparalleled arrogance. He would address his equals, even those who knew him, as Vos, saying that his father was his fighting arm, his lineage, his deeds, and as a soldier he owed nothing to no man, not even the king. And there is a note after Vos, which is V-O-S, and it says, "In Spanish, as in many other languages, varying degrees of deference, distance, familiarity, intimacy, and significant class distinctions can be shown by the form of address, either second or third person, singular or plural." So this is the same idea of when Don Quixote is super mad at Sancho Panza and starts using the formal language rather than the more familiar. So it's the same idea. In addition to this arrogance, he was something of a musician who could strum a guitar so well that some said he could make it speak, but his talents did not end here. He also was a poet, and for each trivial event in the village he would compose a ballad at least a league and a half long. Second person plural, informal. Yes. Mm-hmm. Like saying y'all. Yeah. I was like, is that saying like y'all? Yes. This soldier, then, whom I have just described, this Vicente de la Rosa, this brave gallant, this musician and poet, was often seen and observed by Leandra from a window in her house that overlooked the square. She became infatuated with the glitter of his bright clothes and enchanted by his ballads, for he made 20 copies of each one he composed. She heard of the deeds that he himself attributed to himself, and finally, as the devil must have ordained, she fell in love with him before the presumptuousness of asking for her hand had even occurred to him. And since, in matters of love, no affair is easier to conclude successfully than the one supported by the lady's desire, Leandra and Vicente easily reached an understanding, and before any of her many suitors became aware of her desire, She had satisfied it by leaving the house of her dearly loved father, for she had no mother, and fleeing the village with the soldier, who emerged more triumphant from this undertaking than from the many others he had claimed for himself. This turn of events astonished the entire village, as well as anyone who even heard about it. I was stunned, Anselmo shocked, her father grief-stricken, her kinfolk humiliated, the law solicitous, and its officers alert. They took to the roads, searched the woods and everything they ran across, and at the end of 3 days they found the capricious Leandra in a cave in the wild, wearing only her chemise, and without the great quantity of money and precious jewels she had taken from her house. They brought her back to her anguished father and questioned her about her misfortune. She confessed willingly that Vincente de la Rosa had deceived her, promising to be her husband and persuading her to leave her father's house, saying that he would take her to the richest and most joyous city in the world, which was Naples. Ill-advised and badly deceived, she had believed him, and, after robbing her father and entrusting herself to him on the night she had fled, and he had taken her to a rugged mountain and confined her to the cave where she had been found. She also said that the soldier did not take her honor but robbed her of everything else she had, and left her in that cave, and went away, a series of events that astonished everyone a second time. It was hard for us to believe in the young man's restraint, but she affirmed it so insistently that her disconsol... disconsol... this word... disconsolate? Disconsolate. I don't think I've ever had to say this word out loud. Oh, have a good night, Infinite. See you later. Father found reason to be consoled, caring nothing for the treasure that had been taken from him, for his daughter had preserved the jewel that, once lost, can never be recovered. On the same day that Leandra appeared, her father removed her from our sight and locked her away in a convent in a town not far from here, hoping that time would dissipate some of the shame that had fallen on his daughter. Leandra's extreme youth helped to excuse some of her inexcusable behavior, at least for those who had nothing to gain from her being either wicked or virtuous. But those who were familiar with her considerable intelligence and perspicacity? What? I have definitely never said this word out loud. We're learning how to say new words. Let's see. Hopefully Nightbot will give us a... Nope. Okay. Perspicacity? A keen eye. It's a keen eye. That's what we're gonna say. Intelligence and keen eye attributed her sin not to ignorance, but to her boldness and the natural inclinations of women, which, for the most part, tends to be imprudent and irrational. Perspicacity. Perspicacity. Thank you. You only know it because Lisa in The Simpsons says it. Hey, it's a great show. Learning lots. I only know how to spell aardvark because of Arthur, so. With Leandra cloistered, Anselmo's eyes were left sightless. At least they saw nothing that made me happy. Mine were darkened, lacking a light that could lead them to any joy. With Leandra's absence, our sorrow grew, our patience lessened, and we cursed the soldier's finery and despised her father's lack of foresight. Finally, Anselmo and I agreed to leave the village and come to this valley, where he pastures. Your name is a lot of letters. Hello. Welcome in. Thanks for the follow. Leandro. We're just going to start that sentence over. With Leandra cloistered, Anselmo's eyes were left sightless. At least they saw nothing that made him happy. Mine were darkened, lacking a light that could lead them to any joy. With Leandra's absence, our sorrow grew, our patience lessened, and we cursed the soldier's finery and despised her father's lack of foresight. Finally, Anselmo and I agreed to leave the village and come to this valley, where he pastures a large number of sheep that belong to him, and I graze a large flock of my goats, and we spend our lives among the trees, proclaiming our passions, or together singing the praises of Leandra, or reviling her, or sighing alone and communicating our laments to heaven. In imitation of us, many of Leandra's other suitors have come to these wild mountains to follow our example, and there are so many of them that this place, so crowded with shepherds and sheepfolds, seem to have been transformed into the pastoral Arcadia, and no matter where you go, you will hear the name of the beautiful Leandra. I almost said, instead of sheepfolds, sheep folk, and I'm just imagining a hybrid of sheep and people. There is a note after Arcadia, and it says, Arcadia is a region in the Peloponnesus where classical and Renaissance authors frequently located their pastoral novels. Two important works of this extremely popular genre by Sannazaro and Lope de Vega were entitled La Arcadia, and Cervantes himself published a pastoral novel called La Galatea. One curses her and calls her unpredictable, inconstant, and immodest. Another condemns her as forward and flighty. One absolves and pardons her. Another judges and censors her. One celebrates her beauty. Another denounces her nature. In short, all despise her, and all adore her. And the madness goes so far that there are some who complain of her disdain, but never spoke to her, and some even lament their fate and feel the raging disease of jealousy, though she never gave anyone reason to feel jealousy, because, as I have said, her sin was discovered before her desire. There is no hollow rock, no bank of a stream, no shade of a tree that is not occupied by a shepherd telling his misfortunes to the air. The echoes repeat the name of Leandra wherever it can be sounded. The mountains ring with the name of Leandra. The streams murmur Leandra. And Leandra has us all bewitched and enchanted, hoping without hope, and fearing without knowing what it is we fear. Among all these madmen, the one who shows the least distraction and has the most judgment is my rival, Anselmo, who, having so many other things to complain of, complains only of her absence, and to the sound of a rebec, which he plays admirably, and in verses that show his fine intelligence, he sings his complaints. I follow another path which is easier and, in my opinion, more correct, which is to speak ill of the fickle nature of women, and their inconstancy, their double dealings, their dead promises, their broken vows, and, finally, their irrationality in choosing the objects of their desires and affections. And this was the reason, senores, for the words and arguments I addressed to this goat when I arrived here. For since she is female, I hold her in small esteem, though she is the best in my flock. This is the history I promised to tell you. If I have gone on too long, I will not give short shrift to serving you. My sheepfold is close by, and there I have fresh milk and delicious cheese, and a variety of seasonal fruits as pleasing to the sight as to the taste. End of the chapter. So he has a charcuterie board, is what I'm hearing. Some delicious cheeses and seasonal fruits. All right, I will gladly have some. This is not the first time that somebody's history that we've heard from, the character has been deprecating towards women. I'm thinking specifically, and I brought this one up before, but I'm thinking specifically of the story where there was the funeral, and they're all talking about how much they hate this woman because she's the one that drove him to his death, and then she comes out and is like, nah, no, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. So I'm thinking about that, and I am hoping that we do find Leandra in later chapters so we can hear her side, or at least a different version, because of course, like with all stories that you hear from people, they're you only get their perspective, so you're not getting everything else. And because this little shepherd boy was slighted, the story is like tainted and uh, is in a darker light than probably what it really should be, if that makes sense. We shall see. Mm. We're gonna finish the first part. I'm so excited. This is the last chapter in the first part, and we're gonna finish it, and it will be glorious. Let's do it. You think of stories between two people to be like a coin, two big sides, with something in between that is often overlooked. Ooh, interesting, Star. That's an interesting way to put it, for sure. Yeah, nobody talks about like that division between them. Or there's always like I mean, this is basically the same thing of like three sides to a story, your side, their side, and then what actually happened, which I think is also super interesting. Mm. All right, are we ready to be done with part 1? Should I stall any longer? Are we scared? I mean, I'm always scared, but not of this. Look, look at us. We're doing so good. All right, chapter 52. Regarding the quarrel that Don Quixote had with the goatherd, as well as the strange adventure of the penitents, which he brought to a successful conclusion by the sweat of his brow. I just love all of these, like, chapter titles. They're so great. The tale of the goatherd pleased all who heard it, especially the canon, who, with remarkable curiosity, noted the manner in which he had told it, for he was as far from resembling a rustic goatherd as he was close to seeming an intelligent courtier. And so he said that the priest was absolutely correct when he claimed that the mountains bred educated men. Everyone paid compliments to Eugenio. That's his name. I forgot his name. But the most liberal in doing so was Don Quixote, who said to him, "There can be no doubt, brother goatherd, that if I were able to embark upon a new adventure, I wouldst begin immediately to bring thine to a happy conclusion. For despite the abbess and all those who might wish to prevent it, I wouldst rescue Leandra from the convent, where she is surely held against her will, and place her in thy hands, so that thou couldst do with her as thou wouldst, and it pleaseth thee, always, however, adhering to the laws of the chivalry, which commandeth that no damsel shalt have any offence whatsoever committed against her person. And I trusteth in God our Lord that the power of an evil enchanter is not so great that I canst not be overcome by that of another enchanter with more virtuous intentions, And when that happeneth, I vow to give thee my help and assistance, as I am obliged to do my very profession, which is none other than favoring the weak and helpless. The goatherd looked at him, and when he saw Don Quixote so badly dressed and looking so shabby, he was taken aback, and asked the barber, who was not far away, "Señor, who is this man who looks so peculiar and talks in this fashion?" "Who would he be," responded the barber, "but the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha, righter of wrongs, redresser of grievances, defender of damsels, scourge of giants, and victor in battle." "That sounds to me," responded the goatherd, "like the things one reads in books about knights-errant, who did everything your grace says with regard to this man, though it seems to me that either your grace is joking, or this gentleman must have a few vacant chambers in his head." "You are a villain and a scoundrel," said Don Quixote, "and you are the one who is vacant and foolish. I have more upstairs than the fine upstanding woman who bore you ever did." As he was speaking and saying this, he seized a loaf of bread that was beside him and hit the goatherd with it full in the face with so much fury that he flattened his nose. But the goatherd cared nothing for jokes, and when he saw how badly he was being mistreated, with little regard for the carpet, or the table linen, or those who were eating, he leaped on Don Quixote and put both hands around his neck, and surely would have choked him if Sancho Panza had not come up just then, seized him by the shoulders, and thrown him down on the makeshift table, breaking plates, shattering cups, and spilling and scattering everything that was on it. Don Quixote, when he found that he was free, threw himself on top of the goatherd, and he, his face covered in blood and bruised where Sancho had kicked him, crawled on all fours, looking for a knife on the table to take his bloody revenge, but was prevented from doing so by the canon and the priest. The barber, however, helped the goatherd to hold Don Quixote down and rain down on him so many blows that the poor knight's face bled as heavily as his adversary. The canon and the priest doubled over with laughter. The officers of the Brotherhood jumped up and down with glee, and everyone sicked them on as if they were dogs involved in a fight. Only Sancho Panza despaired, because he could not shake free from one of the canon's servants, who prevented him from helping his master. In short, everyone was diverted and amused, except for the two who were flailing away at each other, when they heard a trumpet, a sound so mournful it made them turn toward the place where it seemed to originate. But the one most aroused by the sound was Don Quixote, and though he lay beneath the goatherd, much against his will and more than a little battered, he said to him, "Brother demon, for it is not possible that you are anything else, since you have had sufficient power and strength to overcome mine, I implore you, let us call a truce for no more than an hour, because it seems to me that the dolorous sound of the trumpet reaching our ears summons me to a new adventure." The goatherd, who by this time was weary of hitting and being hit, released him immediately, and Don Quixote rose to his feet as he turned toward the sound, and suddenly saw many men dressed in white, in the manner of penitents, coming down a slope. In fact, that year the clouds had denied the earth their moisture, and in every village and hamlet in the region there were processions, rogations, and public penances, asking God to open the hands of his mercy and allow it to rain. To this end, the people from a nearby village were coming in procession to a holy hermitage located on one of the hills that formed the valley. Don Quixote saw the strange dress of the penitents, and not recalling the countless times he must have seen them in the past, he imagined that this was the start of an adventure, and since he was a knight-errant, He alone could undertake it, and this idea was confirmed for him when he thought that an image draped in mourning that they were carrying was actually a noble lady carried away against her will by those cowardly and low-born villains. No sooner had this thought passed through his mind than he rushed over to Rocinante, who was grazing, removed the bridle and shield from the forebow of his saddle, and had the bridle on him in a moment. He asked Sancho for his sword, mounted Rocinante, grasped his shield, and called in a loud voice to all those present, "Now, my valiant companions, you will see how important it is that there be knights in the world who profess the order of knight-errantry. Now I say that you will see, in the liberty of all that good lady held captive there, how knights-errant are to be esteemed." As he said this, he pressed Rocinante with his thighs because he had no spurs, and at a brisk canter, for nowhere in this true history do we read that Rocinante ran at a full gallop, he rode out to his encounter with the penitents, although the priest, the canon, and the barber did what they could to stop him, to no avail, nor was he stopped by the shouts of Sancho, who cried, "Where are you going, Señor Don Quixote? What demons in your heart incite you to attack our Catholic faith? Oh, look, devil take me, and see that it's a procession of penitents, and the lady they're carrying on the platform is the holy image of the Blessed Virgin. Think, Señor, about what you're doing, because this time it really isn't what you think." Sancho's efforts were all in vain, because his master was so determined to reach the figures in sheets and to free the lady in mourning that he did not hear a word, and if he had, he would not have turned back, even if the king had ordered him to. And so he reached the procession and reined in Rocinante, who already wanted to rest for a while, and in a hoarse, angry voice he called, "Oh, you who keep your faces covered, perhaps because you are evil, attend, and hear what I wish to say to you." The first to stop were those carrying the image, and one of the four clerics intoning the litanies saw the strange appearance of Don Quixote, the skinniness of Rocinante, and other comic features that he noticed and discovered about the knight, and responded by saying, "Good brother, if you want to say it quickly, because these brethren are disciplining their flesh, and we cannot listen to anything, nor is it right for us to do so, unless it is so brief that it can be said in 2 words." "I shall say it in 1, replied Don Quixote, "and it is this." Continues to not say it in 1 word. "You must immediately release that beauteous lady whose tears and melancholy countenance are clear signs that you take her against her will, and have done her some notable wrong, and I, who was born into the world to right such iniquities, shall not consent to your taking another step forward until you give her the freedom she desires and deserves." When they heard these words, they all realized that Don Quixote had to be a madman, and they began to laugh very heartily. This laughter was like gunpowder thrown into the flames of Don Quixote's wrath, because without another word he drew his sword and charged the procession. One of the men who was carrying the platform let his companions bear his share of the weight and came out to meet Don Quixote, brandishing the forked pole or staff that he used to support the platform while he was resting. Don Quixote struck it at a great blow with his sword that broke it in 2, leaving the man with the 3rd part of his hand, and with that part he hit Don Quixote so hard on the shoulder, on the same side as his sword, that the knight could not hold up his shield to protect himself from the peasantish attack, and poor Don Quixote fell to the ground in a very sorry state. Sancho Panza, who came panting close behind him, saw him fall, and he shouted at Don Quixote's attacker not to hit him again, because he was a poor enchanted knight who had never harmed anyone in all the days of his life. But what stopped the peasant was not the shouting of Sancho, but his seeing that Don Quixote lay without moving hand or foot, and believing that he had killed him, he quickly tucked his penitent robe up into his belt and fled across the countryside like a deer. By now all of Don Quixote's companions had reached the spot where he lay. Those in the procession who saw them, along with the officers holding their crossbows, running toward them, feared trouble, and made a circle around the image with their pointed hoods, raised with their scourges in hand, and the priests clutching their candlesticks, they awaited the assault, determined to defend themselves against their attackers, and even go on the offensive if they could. And there's a note after pointed hoods. It says, penitents in Spain, for example, those still seen today in Holy Week processions, and those brought before the tribunals of the Inquisition, wore sheets and hoods that bear an unfortunate resemblance to the outfits of the Ku Klux Klan. I was thinking that same thing as soon as they said, like, that description is exactly the description I thought that they were saying. But fortune arranged matters better than they had expected, because the only thing Sancho did was to throw himself on the body of his master in the belief that he was dead, and break into the most woeful and laughable lament in the world. The priest was recognized by another priest in the procession, and this calmed the fears of both parties. The first priest quickly gave the second a brief accounting of who Don Quixote was, and the second priest, along with the entire crowd of penitents, went to see if the poor knight was dead, and they heard Sancho Panza, with tears in his eyes, saying, "Oh, flower of chivalry, a single blow with a club has brought you your well-spent years to an end. Oh, honor of your lineage, honor and glory of all La Mancha, even all of the world, which, with you absent, will be overrun by evildoers unafraid of being punished for their evil doings. O liberal above all Alexanders, for after a mere 8 months of service, you have given me the best insula ever surrounded and encircled by the sea." And there is a note. After 8 months of service, it says, only 17 days have passed since Don Quixote's second sally. Only 17 days. That really puts things into perspective. Oh, humble with the proud and arrogant with the humble, attacker of danger, endurer of insults, enamored without cause, imitator of the god, scourge of the wicked, enemy of the villainous. In short, O knight-errant, which is the finest thing one can say. Sancho's cries and sobs revived Don Quixote, and the first words he said were, "He who liveth absent from thee, O dulcet Dulcinea, is subject to greater miseries than these. Help me, friend Sancho, to climb into the enchanted cart. I canst no longer sit on Rocinante's saddle, for my shoulder is shattered." "I'll do that gladly, señor," responded Sancho, "and let's return to my village in the company of these gentle folk who wish you well, and there we'll arrange to make another sally that will bring us more profit and greater fame." "Well said, Sancho," responded Don Quixote, "and it will be an act of great prudence to allow the present evil influence of the stars to pass." The canon and the priest and the barber told Don Quixote that what he intended to do was very wise, and so, having been greatly amused by the simplicities of Sancho Panza, they placed Don Quixote in the cart, just as he had been before. The procession formed once again and continued on its way. The goatherd took his leave of everyone, the officers did not wish to go any farther, and the priest paid them what he owed them. The canon asked the priest to inform him of what happened to Don Quixote, if he was cured of his madness or continued to suffer from it, and with this he excused himself and continued his journey. In short, they parted and went their separate ways, and those remaining were the priest, the barber, Don Quixote, Panza, and the good Rocinante, who endured everything he saw with as much patience as his master. The driver yoked his oxen and settled Don Quixote on a bundle of hay, and with his customary deliberateness followed the route indicated by the priest, and in 6 days they reached Don Quixote's village, which they entered in the middle of the day, which happened to be Sunday, when everyone was in the square, and the cart carrying Don Quixote drove right through the middle of it. Everyone hurried to see what was in the cart, and when they recognized their neighbor, they were astounded, and a boy ran to give the news to the shopkeeper and niece that their uncle and master had arrived, skinny and yellow, and lying in a pile of hay in an ox cart. It was a pitiful thing to hear the cries of the two good women, to see how they slapped themselves and cursed once again the accursed books of chivalry, all of which started all over again when they saw Don Quixote come through the door. At the news of Don Quixote's arrival, Sancho Panza's wife came running, for she had already learned that her husband had gone away with him to serve as his squire, and as soon as she saw Sancho, the first thing she asked was if the donkey was all right. Sancho responded that he was better than his master. "Oh, thanks be to God," she replied, "for all his mercies. But now tell me, my friend, what have you earned after all your squiring? Have you brought me a new overskirt? Did you bring nice shoes for your children?" "I didn't bring anything like that, dear wife," said Sancho, "though I do have other things that are more valuable and worthwhile." "That makes me very happy," she responded. "Show me those things that are more valuable and worthwhile, my friend. I want to see them and gladden this heart of mine, which has been so sad and unhappy during all the centuries of your absence." "I'll show them to you at home," said Panza, "and for now be happy, because if it's God's will that we go out again in search of adventures, in no time you'll see me made a count, or the governor of an insula, and not any of the ones around here, but the best that can be found. May it please God, my husband, because we surely need it. But tell me, what's all this about insulas? I don't understand." "Honey's not for the donkey's mouth," responded Sancho. "In time you will, dear wife, and even be amazed to hear yourself called ladyship by all your vassals." "What are you saying, Sancho, about ladyships, insulas, and vassals?" responded Juana Panza, which was the name of Sancho's wife. They were not kin, but in La Mancha wives usually take their husband's family name. And there is a note after family name. It says, as indicated in an earlier note in chapter 7, there is a good amount of variation in the name of Sancho's wife. Don't be in such a hurry, Juana, to learn everything all at once. It's enough that I'm telling you the truth, so sew up your mouth. I'll just tell you this, in passing. There's nothing nicer in the world for a man than being the honored squire of a knight-errant seeking adventures, even though it's true that most don't turn out as well as the man would like, because out of 100 that you find, 99 tend to turn out wrong and twisted. I know this from experience, because in some I've been tossed in a blanket, and in others I've been beaten, but even so, it's a fine thing to be out looking for things to happen, crossing mountains, searching forests, climbing peaks, visiting castles, and staying in inns whenever you please, and not paying a devil's maravedi for anything. While Sancho Panza and Juana Panza, his wife, were having his conversation, Don Quixote's housekeeper and niece welcomed him and undressed him, and put him in his old bed. He stared at them, his eyes transfixed, and did not understand where he was. The priest instructed the niece to look after her uncle with great care, and to be very sure she did not allow him to escape again, telling her all that they had been obliged to do to bring him home. At this the two women began to cry out to heaven again, and to renew their curses of books of chivalry, and to ask heaven to overthrow the authors of so many lies and so much foolishness into the bottomless pit. In short, they were distraught and fearful that they would again find themselves without a master and an uncle at the very moment he showed some improvement, and in fact, it turned out just as they imagined. But the author of this history, although he has investigated with curiosity and diligence the feats performed by Don Quixote on his third sally, has found no account of them, at least not in authenticated documents. Their fame has been maintained only in the memories of the Mancha, which tell us that the third time Don Quixote left home, he went to Zaragoza and took part in some famous tourneys held in that city, and there things happened to him worthy of his valor and fine intelligence. Nor could he find or learn anything about Don Quixote's final end, and never would have, if good fortune had not presented him with an ancient physician who had in his possession a leaden box that he claimed to have found in the ruined foundations of an old hermitage that was being renovated. In this box he discovered some parchments on which, in Gothic script, Castilian verses celebrated many of the knight's exploits and described the beauty of Dulcinea of Toboso, the figure of Rocinante, the fidelity of Sancho Panza, and the tomb of Don Quixote, with various epitaphs and eulogies to his life and customs. Those that were legible and could be transcribed are the ones that the trustworthy author of this new and unparalleled history has set down here. This author does not ask compensation from his readers for the immense labor required to investigate and search all the Manchegan archives in order to bring this history to light. He asks only that they afford it the same credit that judicious readers give to the books of chivalry that are esteemed so highly in the world. With this, he will consider himself well paid and satisfied, and encouraged to seek and publish other histories, if not as true, then at least as inventive and entertaining as this one. The first words written on the parchment discovered in the leaden box were these: the academicians of La Argamasilla in La Mancha, on the life and death of the valiant Don Quixote of La Mancha. Hoc script servant. Ignoramus academicians of La Argamasilla at the tomb of Don Quixote. Epitaph. The numbskull who so bravely draped La Mancha with more rich spoils than Jason brought to Crete, the mind that deemed the pointed vein to be needed when something blunter would be meet, the arm whose mighty power extends so far that from Cathay to Italian Gaete's shore came the most awesome muse, the most aware, who e'er graved verses on a plaque of bronze, he who left each Amadis behind, who turned his mighty back on Galaor, and vanquished all in valor and in love, causing every Belianis to fall mute, who mounted Rocinante and went erring, lies here beneath this cold and marble stone. The epitaph is quite large. By the fauner in Laudum Dulcinea of Toboso. Sonnet. She with the homely face of a kitchen wench, her bosom high, her gestures fierce and martial, is Dulcinea, queen of all Toboso, beloved of the mighty Don Quixote. For her sake he climbed every rugged peak of the great Sierra and trod the countryside, from famed Montiel to the green and grassy plain of Aranjuez on foot, weary, in pain. The fault was Rocinante's. Oh, harsh the fate of this Manchegan lady and her knight. Errant and unvanquished, in tender youth, she left her beauty behind her when she died. And he, though his name's inscribed in snowy marble, could not escape the piercing toils of love. By Capricious, the most discerning. academician of La Argamasilla in praise of Rocinante, the horse of Don Quixote of La Mancha. Sonnet. Upon the proud and gleaming diamond throne, where mighty Mars leaves footprints marked in blood, the mad Manchegan plants his noble banner, that flutters still with strength so rare and strange, that there he hangs his arms, the sharp-edged steel that devastates and cleaves and cuts in twain. New feats of arms, but art must now invent a new style for this newest paladin. And if Gaul boasts and brags of Amadis, whose brave descendants glory brought to Greece, and spread her fame and triumph far and wide, today in the chamber where Bologna reigns, she crowns the brave Quixote, and for his sake La Mancha's honored more than Greece or Gaul. Never may these glories bear oblivion's stain, for ever Rocinante in gallantry surpasses Briadoro and Bayardo. And there is a note after Bayardo. It says, these are the horses of Orlando and Rinaldos de Montalban. It should be noted that this sonnet, the kind called codanto, is in Italian, has an extra tercet. By Mocker, Argamasian Academy, Academic, to Sancho Panza. Sonnet. This is Sancho Panza, in body small, but great in valor, a miracle most strange. He has, I swear and certify to you, the simplest squire the world has ever seen. A hair's breadth away from being a count, but insolence and insult, a miser's world. A greedy time conspired all against him, for a donkey ne'er is spared that injury. He rode that ass, and pardon the expression, a gentle squire behind an even gentler horse named Rocinante and his master. Oh, how we mortals wait and hope in vain. At first how sweet the promise, then bitterly it vanishes in shadow, smoke, and dream. By Devilkin, accommodation of La Argamasilla at the tomb of Don Quixote. Epitaph. Here lies the famous knight, errant and badly bruised and borne by Rocinante down many a primrose path. Sancho Panza, the simple lies here too, beside him, the squire most loyal and true, who ever plied the trade. By TikTok, accommodation of Argamasilla at the tomb of Dulcinea of Toboso. Epitaph. Here rests the fair Dulcinea, once rosy-fleshed and plump, now turned to dust and ashes by fearful, hideous death. She came of unsullied stock, with a hint of nobility, the pure passion of great Quixote, and the glory of her home. These were the verses that could be read. In the others, the writing was worm-eaten, and they were given to an academician to be deciphered. Our best information is that he has done so, after many long nights of laborious study, and intends to publish them, hoping for a third sally by Don Quixote. Forsi altro cantera con miglior pectio. There's a note, and it says the line from Orlando Furioso should read Forse altri cantera con miglior lettro. Perhaps another will sing a better style, and is cited by Cervantes in the first chapter of the second part of the novel. And that, my friends, is the end of part 1. And there it is. part two. Oh, very exciting, very exciting. Oh man. Before you even get to the first chapter in part two, there is a, let's see, what is it called? There's like a, it says, to the Count of Lemos, and then there is a prologue to the reader. Well, I think that's going to be a good place to stop tonight. And then next time we'll just start right on right on part two. So this is how far we are. Making progress. Part one is done. Amazing, amazing. So good. Okay. Thoughts. I am still enjoying this. I still think that the humor is great. It's interesting, the writing style of Cervantes, that he can be talking about like like poop jokes and stuff, but the way that it's written isn't so like face value. Like it's still there, but you just have to like follow the narrative a bit to be like, ah, that's what he's saying. It is an educated poop joke. um so yeah, I am enjoying the humor. I have enjoyed so far the returning of characters that we have met earlier on in stories, and then they follow us in like a long time and we almost forget about them. Something that Cervantes does also is, if there is something that is mentioned that hasn't been mentioned for a long time, whether it's a character or like an action, something like that, but it is very pertinent to what's happening right now, Cervantes will be like, hey, remember this thing or remember this person? They're the one who did this. So that's really nice, especially since it's something that's like so stinking thick. Uh, yeah, I am enjoying the characters. I, if I had to pick a favorite, I would say that like Sancho. He's so dopey sometimes. Sometimes he's like super like with it and is like, okay, my friend, you're hallucinating. You have this delusion. This is what's actually happening. And then other times he's like, I'm going to be a count and I'm going to have an insula and my lady is going to have many vassals to worship her feet. So it is interesting how he does that like back and forth almost. And there is a lot of commentary on like media and books in general and sort of the interplay between like entertainment versus purely informational and how those can be intertwined, and when they're intertwined what happens with it. So that's a fun thing to explore. It's almost like they should be reading this book in college, which I know happens a lot. I was not in one of those classes. So these are all very first impressions. I have no idea how the rest of the story goes. I have absolutely no inkling. I don't even have guesses. So my brain is turned off and I'm just along for the ride. So yes, we are going to end a little bit early today, just so that we can start fresh next time with part two. But I hope you all have a great rest of your day. As always, thank you for being here. Whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you and I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.